I have spent the better part of my life watching people exhaust themselves in the most peculiar way. They carry burdens that were never theirs to bear. They worry that opinions will be forgotten by tomorrow. They lose sleep over outcomes they cannot control. And they do this with such dedication, such unwavering commitment, that you would think their very survival depended on it. But what if I told you that this entire enterprise, this magnificent obsession with caring about everything, is perhaps the greatest trick your mind has ever played on you? What if the path to freedom, to genuine peace, to authentic living, lies not in caring more, but in learning the delicate art of caring less? Now, before you recoil at what sounds like cold indifference, let me clarify something crucial. I am not speaking of becoming callous or heartless. I am not advocating for a retreat into selfish isolation. No, what I am describing is far more sophisticated, far more human than that. I am speaking of discernment, of wisdom, of the profound liberation that comes when you finally understand which battles are worth fighting and which are merely shadows dancing on the wall of your consciousness. You see, somewhere along the way, we have confused caring with consciousness. We have mistaken worry for love. We have convinced ourselves that the depth of our concern determines the quality of our character. But this is a dangerous confusion, one that leads to a peculiar form of spiritual exhaustion where we become martyrs to things that do not deserve our sacrifice. I remember sitting with patients, year after year, watching them struggle with this very dilemma. A woman who could not sleep because she worried what her neighbors thought of her garden. A man who developed stomach ulcers from constantly anticipating his boss's disapproval. Children who became anxious and withdrawn because they absorbed their parents' fears about everything from grades to global politics, and in each case, the suffering was real, but the source was an illusion. The illusion that everything matters equally. The illusion that your emotional response to every stimulus is somehow required. The illusion that caring deeply about everything makes you a better person rather than a depleted one. But here's what I discovered in my decades of exploring the human psyche. The mind that tries to care about everything ends up caring about nothing with genuine depth. It becomes scattered, reactive, constantly pulled in directions that lead nowhere meaningful. It is like trying to be in love with every person you meet. The very attempt dilutes the experience until love itself becomes meaningless. True caring, authentic concern, real love requires boundaries. It requires the courage to say no to 1,000 things so that you can say yes to the few things that actually matter. And this is where we encounter the first paradox of not caring. You must care enough about your own well-being, your own peace of mind, your own authentic path to refuse the demands of everything else. Most people live their entire lives without ever asking themselves a fundamental question. What is actually mine to carry? What belongs to me and what belongs to the world? Instead, they pick up every burden they encounter, every worry that crosses their path, every problem that presents itself, as if they were some sort of cosmic janitor responsible for cleaning up the emotional mess of existence. But you are not responsible for other people's happiness. You are not required to solve every problem that comes to your attention. You are not obligated to have an opinion about every event that unfolds in the world. And you are certainly not meant to carry the weight of outcomes you cannot control. This realization, when it truly penetrates your consciousness, is simultaneously liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it frees you from an impossible burden. Terrifying because it forces you to confront something most people spend their lives avoiding, the reality of your own limitations. You see, The compulsive need to care about everything is often a defense against feeling powerless. If we can worry about it, if we can have strong opinions about it, if we can lose sleep over it, then somehow we maintain the illusion that we have some control over it. The worry becomes a form of magical thinking, as if our concern alone could influence outcomes that are entirely beyond our reach. But what happens when you let go of this illusion? What happens when you stop trying to control things through the sheer force of your emotional investment? Something remarkable occurs. You discover that you actually have more influence over the things that truly matter, because your energy is no longer scattered across 1,000 irrelevant concerns. Think of it this way. Your attention is like sunlight. When it is diffused through a magnifying glass, held at the wrong distance, it produces nothing but a dim, weak glow. But when you focus that same light through proper alignment, it can literally set things on fire. Your caring works the same way. When it is spread thin across everything that crosses your path, it becomes weak and ineffective. But when you concentrate it on what genuinely matters, it becomes a force of tremendous power. This is the subtle art I am speaking of. Not the crude rejection of all concern, but the refined ability to distinguish between what deserves your emotional investment and what does not. It requires developing what I call psychological sovereignty. The recognition that you are the ruler of your own inner kingdom, and like any wise ruler, you must choose your battles carefully. But how does one develop this discernment? How do you learn to separate what is yours from what belongs to the world? The answer lies in understanding something fundamental about human psychology. Most of what we think we care about, we do not actually care about at all. We care about what other people think we should care about. We care about what society tells us is important. We care about maintaining an image of ourselves as caring people. In other words, much of our caring is not authentic caring at all. It is performance. It is the ego's attempt to maintain a particular identity, to be seen in a certain way, to avoid the discomfort of being judged as selfish or indifferent. Real caring comes from a different place entirely. It arises spontaneously from your authentic nature, from what you genuinely love, from what truly moves you. It does not need to announce itself or justify itself to others. It simply is. And because it comes from this deeper place, it has a quality of effortlessness that compulsive caring lacks. When you learn to distinguish between authentic caring and performed caring, something profound shifts in your relationship with the world. You stop being reactive. You stop being pulled in every direction by the latest crisis, the newest outrage, the most recent demand for your attention. Instead, you develop what I call conscious responsiveness. You choose where to place your attention based on your own deep knowing rather than external pressure. This does not make you cold or disconnected. In fact, it makes you more genuinely available to what matters most. When you are not depleted by worrying about things beyond your control, you have more presence, more energy, more authentic care to offer where it can actually make a difference. But here is where it gets interesting. The world will resist your newfound sovereignty. People who are used to your scattered attention, your constant worry, your automatic responses, will feel threatened when you begin to choose consciously where to invest your care. They will call you selfish. They will question your compassion. They will try to guilt you back into the old patterns of indiscriminate concern. This resistance is actually a sign that you are on the right path, because when you stop being available for every drama, every crisis, every demand for emotional labor that comes your way, you force others to confront their own relationship with these things. Your refusal to participate in collective anxiety becomes a mirror that shows others their own unconscious patterns. And this brings us to perhaps the most profound aspect of not caring. It is not really about the external world at all. It is about your relationship with your own mind. Most people are tyrannized by their own thoughts, their own emotions, their own reactions. They believe that every thought that arises must be taken seriously, every emotion must be analyzed, every reaction must be acted upon. But you are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are not your reactions. You are the awareness that observes all of these things. And from this place of awareness, you can choose which thoughts deserve your attention, which emotions warrant your investment, which reactions serve your highest good. This is the deepest level of not caring, learning to observe the movements of your own mind without being swept away by them, watching thoughts arise and pass away without grasping onto them, feeling emotions flow through you without identifying with them. This is not suppression or denial, it is conscious non-attachment. When you learn to observe this way, something curious happens. The very things that once seemed so urgent, so demanding of your immediate response, begin to reveal themselves as temporary visitors in the theater of your consciousness. That colleague's disapproval that kept you awake for weeks, it passes through like weather. The social media outrage that consumed your entire evening, it dissolves like sugar in rain. The family drama that felt like the end of the world, it transforms into just another story your mind was telling itself. But do not mistake this for indifference. What you discover instead is a quality I have come to call selective engagement. You begin to recognize that your emotional energy is not an infinite resource to be scattered like seeds on barren ground. It is precious fuel that must be directed with wisdom of someone who understands that not every fire deserves to be fed. I have watched people destroy believed was themselves through what they noble caring. A mother who made herself sick with worry over her adult children's every decision. A man who developed chronic anxiety because he felt personally responsible for solving climate change. A woman who could not enjoy a single meal because she was constantly thinking about world hunger. These people were not evil or selfish. They were suffering from a profound confusion about the nature of responsibility and the boundaries of the self. You see, there is a shadow side to caring that nobody talks about. When you make yourself emotionally available to everything, you paradoxically become emotionally available to nothing. Your capacity for genuine response becomes diluted until you are merely reacting, not responding. Reacting from a place of unconscious compulsion rather than responding from a place of conscious choice. The difference is enormous. Reaction is automatic, unconscious, driven by patterns you inherited from your family, your culture, your past experiences. Response is deliberate, conscious, arising from your present awareness and authentic values. Most people spend their entire lives reacting and call it caring. But true response, authentic engagement with life, requires something most people are terrified to develop. It requires saying no, not just to obvious demands and requests, but to the subtle pull of 1,000 small concerns that masquerade as important but serve only to keep you busy, distracted, and ultimately powerless to effect real change where change is actually needed. I remember a patient who came to me exhausted and depressed. She worked at a non-profit organization dedicated to helping people, and she could not understand why she felt so empty inside. As we explored her daily life, a pattern emerged. She was trying to help everyone all the time in every possible way. She answered every email within minutes. She said yes to every request for her time. She worried about every person who crossed her path. She had made herself into a kind of human emergency room, open 24 hours a day to anyone's crisis. But here was the paradox. In her desperate attempt to care about everything, she had lost touch with what she actually cared about. Her own dreams had been buried under the avalanche of other people's needs. Her own voice had been drowned out by the chorus of demands. She had become so busy being helpful that she had forgotten who she was beneath all that helping. This is the trap of indiscriminate caring. It feels virtuous, even noble, but it is actually a form of self-abandonment. You lose yourself in the maze of other people's problems, other people's emotions, other people's expectations. And the cruel irony is that this kind of scattered compulsive caring often helps no one, because it comes from a place of depletion rather than genuine abundance. When I helped her learn to set boundaries, to choose consciously where to direct her care, something remarkable happened. She did not become cold or selfish. She became more effective, more present, more genuinely helpful to the people and causes that truly mattered to her. Her energy was no longer dissipated across 100 small concerns. It was concentrated where it could actually make a difference. This is what I mean by the art of not caring. It is not about caring less in total. It is about caring more consciously, more selectively, more authentically. It is about recognizing that your attention is sacred, your emotional energy is finite, and your responsibility extends only as far as your actual influence. But the world will test you in this. Society has invested heavily in your unconscious caring, your automatic responses, your willingness to absorb its anxieties without question. When you begin to withdraw from collective worry, when you stop participating in mass hysteria, when you refuse to be outraged on command, you will encounter resistance. People will accuse you of not caring enough. They will question your compassion, your commitment, your very humanity. They will try to shame you back into the old patterns of scattered concern. And here you must remember something crucial. Their reaction is not really about you. It is about their own discomfort with the possibility that they too could choose differently. Your conscious non-participation in collective anxiety forces others to confront an uncomfortable truth, that much of what they call caring is actually a form of unconscious participation in patterns that serve no one. That their constant worry, their perpetual outrage, their endless reactivity might not be the virtuous engagement they believed it to be. This is why stepping out of unconscious caring is such a radical act. It is not just personal liberation. It is a kind of quiet revolution against the tyranny of scattered attention, against the demands of a world that profits from your distraction, against the assumption that being a good person requires being available to everything all the time. When you learn to care selectively, consciously, authentically, you discover something that may surprise you. You become more caring, not less. But your caring has a different quality. It is focused, intentional, arising from your deepest values rather than external pressure. It has the power to create real change because it comes from a place of fullness rather than depletion. You also discover that many of the things you thought you cared about, you were actually just worried about. Worry is not care. Worry is fear wearing the mask of concern. It creates the illusion of engagement while actually preventing you from taking effective action. When you stop worrying about things beyond your control, you create space for genuine care about things within your influence. This distinction between worry and care, between reaction and response, between scattered concern and focused attention, is at the heart of psychological maturity. It is the difference between being lived by your circumstances and consciously choosing how to engage with life. But perhaps the most profound discovery comes when you realize that not caring about everything is actually the path to caring about anything with real depth. When you stop trying to love everyone equally, you can love someone deeply. When you stop trying to save the entire world, you can make a real difference in your corner of it. When you stop being available to every crisis, you can be truly present for the moments that matter most. This is the paradox at the heart of human existence. To care about everything is to care about nothing. To be responsible for everything is to be responsible for nothing. To try to control everything is to control nothing. But when you learn to choose consciously, to engage selectively, to care authentically, you discover a power you never knew you had. The power to say no to what does not serve life, so that you can say yes to what does. The power to withdraw your energy from what depletes you, so that you can invest it in what nourishes you. The power to stop being reactive, so that you can become truly responsive. And in this conscious choosing, this deliberate engagement, this refined art of caring and not caring, you find something that has been missing from your life. You find peace. Not the peace of indifference, but the peace of right action. Not the peace of withdrawal from life, but the peace of full engagement with what matters most. This peace is not something you achieve once and then possess forever. It is something you must choose again and again, moment by moment, decision by decision. Each day presents you with 1,000 opportunities to scatter your attention, to absorb someone else's anxiety, to react automatically to whatever stimulus crosses your path. And each time you have a choice. You can fall back into the old pattern of indiscriminate caring, or you can practice the art of conscious selection. You can allow yourself to be pulled into every drama that unfolds around you, or you can maintain what I have come to think of as sacred distance. Not the distance of coldness, but the distance of clarity. The space necessary to see what is actually happening, rather than simply reacting to it. I have noticed something curious about people who master this art. They become what others often describe as mysteriously calm, not because they have achieved some superhuman state of detachment, but because they have learned to distinguish between what belongs to them and what belongs to the world. They carry themselves with a quality of presence that comes from being fully where they are, rather than being everywhere at once. This presence has a strange effect on others. Some people are drawn to it like moths to a flame, sensing something they have lost in themselves. Others are deeply threatened by it, because it mirrors back to them their own scattered state. When you stop participating in collective anxiety, you become a kind of living reminder that another way of being is possible. But here is what I want you to understand about this journey. It is not a destination you arrive at, but a practice you engage in. There will be days when you forget, when you find yourself once again caught in the web of unnecessary concerns. You will catch yourself worrying about things you cannot control, absorbing emotions that do not belong to you, reacting to provocations that deserve no response. This is not failure. This is simply being human. The art lies not in never falling back into old patterns, but in noticing when you have fallen and gently redirecting your attention to what actually matters. It is a practice of return again and again to your own center, your own truth, your own authentic engagement with life. I remember watching my own children learn to walk. They would take a few steps, fall down, get back up, take a few more steps, fall again. Never once did they conclude that walking was impossible. They had fallen because they simply kept practicing, kept returning to the attempt, until walking became as natural as breathing. Learning not to care about everything is like this. You practice conscious choice, fall back into unconscious reaction, notice what happened, and practice again. Each time you return to conscious choosing, you strengthen that capacity within yourself. Each time you say no to what does not serve, you make it easier to say yes to what does. And gradually, something shifts in the very fabric of your being. You begin to move through life with what I can only describe as conscious ease. Not because life becomes easier, but because you are no longer making it harder than it needs to be. You are no longer adding the weight of unnecessary concerns to whatever genuine challenges you face. This shift affects everything. Your relationships deepen because you are more present to the people who actually matter to you. Your work becomes more effective because your energy is focused rather than scattered. Your inner life becomes more peaceful because you are no longer at war with circumstances beyond your control. But perhaps most importantly, you discover something about the nature of influence that may surprise you. When you stop trying to control everything, you actually have more real influence over the things that matter. When you withdraw your energy from what you cannot change, you have more energy available for what you can change. This is not a philosophical concept, but a practical reality I have witnessed countless times. The person who stops worrying about their adult child's every decision often finds that child begins to make better decisions. The individual who ceases to react to every workplace drama discovers they have more influence over workplace culture than they ever did through constant involvement. Why does this happen? Because when you stop being reactive, you become truly responsive. And response has a different quality than reaction. Response comes from a place of groundedness, of choice, of authentic engagement. It carries more weight precisely because it is not automatic, not compulsive, not driven by unconscious patterns. People sense this difference, even if they cannot articulate it. They recognize authentic response because it has a quality of presence that reaction lacks. It comes from someone who is truly there, truly choosing, truly engaged with what is actually happening, rather than with their fears about what might happen or their regrets about what has already happened. This is why the art of deeper, the art of not caring, is actually caring. When you learn to care selectively, consciously, caring authentically, your care is more power, because it comes from fullness rather than emptiness, from choice rather than compulsion, from presence rather than anxiety. But I want to address something that troubles many people when they first encounter these ideas. They worry that learning not to care about everything will make them selfish, cold, disconnected from the suffering of the world. This concern reveals something beautiful about human nature, but it is based on a fundamental misunderstanding. Caring consciously does not make you less compassionate. It makes your compassion more effective. When you are not depleted by worrying about things you cannot control, you have more genuine care available for situations where you can actually help. When you are not scattered across 1,000 concerns, you can be fully present to the person in front of you who needs your attention. True compassion is not the ability to feel everyone's pain all the time. That is not compassion. That is a form of psychological overwhelm that serves no one. Real compassion is the ability to be present to suffering when presence is needed, to act when action is possible, and to remain grounded when neither presence nor action will help. This discernment, this ability to distinguish between helpful engagement and mere emotional absorption, is what separates mature compassion from unconscious reactivity. The person who has learned this art can walk into a room full of anxiety without anxious, becoming pain, can witness without being consumed by it, can offer help without losing themselves in the process. I think of a doctor I once knew who worked in an emergency room. Every day she encountered human suffering in its rawest forms. Yet she moved through her work with a quality of calm presence that was remarkable. She cared deeply about her patients, but she did not absorb their trauma. She responded to their needs without being overwhelmed by their emotions. When I asked her how she maintained this balance, she said something that has stayed with me for decades. She said, "I learned that I can be present to their suffering without suffering myself. My job is to help them, not to feel what they feel. If I become overwhelmed by every case, I become useless to all of them." This is wisdom. This is the practical application of conscious caring. She had learned to maintain what psychologists call professional boundaries, but what I would describe as psychological sovereignty. She knew where she ended and others began. She understood that her emotional state was her responsibility, just as theirs was theirs. This does not make her cold or uncaring. It makes her capable of sustained service. Because she does not burn out from emotional overwhelm, she can continue to be available to those who need her help. Because she maintains her center, she can offer strength to those who have temporarily lost theirs. This is the model for all conscious caring. You learn to be present without being absorbed, to care without being consumed, to help without being depleted. And this learning requires practice, patience, and above all, the courage to disappoint people who expect you to be available for their every emotional need. Because here is what you will discover as you develop this art. Many people do not actually want your help. They want your participation in their drama. They do not seek solutions. They seek validation for their chosen form of suffering. They are not looking for someone to help them out of their predicament. They are looking for someone to join them in it. Learning to recognize this distinction is crucial to maintaining your own psychological health. When someone repeatedly comes to you with the same problem, but shows no interest in the solutions you offer, they are not actually seeking help. They are seeking what I call emotional companionship in their suffering. There is nothing inherently wrong with this. Sometimes people need to be heard, to have their experience witnessed and validated. But when this becomes a pattern, when the same person comes to you week after week, month after month, with the same complaints but no willingness to change anything, you must recognize that your role has become enabling rather than helping. The conscious choice in such situations is to offer presence without offering solutions you know will not be implemented. You can listen with compassion while maintaining clear boundaries about what you will and will not take on as your responsibility. You can care about their well-being without making their well-being your project. This requires a kind of emotional maturity that our culture rarely teaches. We are taught that good people should be available to help whenever help is requested. But we are not taught to recognize when our help is actually hindering someone's growth, when our availability is enabling their avoidance of necessary change. Learning this discernment is part of the art of not caring. You must care enough about someone's real growth to refuse to participate in patterns that keep them stuck. You must love them enough to disappoint them when disappointment might motivate them to take responsibility for their own life. This is perhaps the most difficult aspect of conscious caring, because it requires you to act from wisdom rather than sentiment. It asks you to consider what will actually serve someone's highest good rather than what will make them feel better in the moment. And sometimes these two things are directly opposed to each other. I have watched parents destroy their children through excessive caring, through an inability to allow their children to experience the natural consequences of their choices. I have seen friends enable each other's destructive patterns in the name of being supportive. I have observed how entire families can become trapped in cycles of dysfunction because no one has the courage to stop caring in the old way and start caring in a more conscious way. The shift from unconscious to conscious caring is not just a personal transformation, it is a gift you give to everyone around you. When you stop participating in unhealthy patterns, you create space for healthier patterns to emerge. When you refuse to enable someone's avoidance of responsibility, you invite them to discover their own strength. This is not always welcomed, at least not initially. People who have grown accustomed to your scattered attention, your automatic responses, your willingness to absorb their emotional overflow, will resist when you begin to choose more consciously. They may accuse you of becoming selfish, cold, or uncaring, but if you can hold steady in your new way of being, something remarkable often happens. The people in your life begin to step up. When you stop doing for others what they can do for themselves, they often discover capabilities they never knew they had. When you stop worrying about their problems more than they do, they sometimes begin to take their own lives more seriously. Not everyone will make this shift. Some people are so invested in their patterns of dependency or drama that they will leave your life rather than relate to you in a healthier way. This can be painful, but it is also liberating. It makes space for relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care rather than unconscious enabling. The people who remain, who adapt to your new boundaries and conscious way of caring, become true companions on the journey of life. Your relationships with them deepen because they are based on authenticity rather than performance, on choice rather than compulsion, on genuine care rather than unconscious reactivity. And you discover something profound about the nature of love itself. Real love does not require you to lose yourself. Real care does not demand that you become depleted. True compassion does not ask you to absorb everyone else's suffering. Instead, love asks you to be fully yourself so that you can offer something genuine to others. Care asks you to maintain your own well-being so that you can be sustainably available to what matters most. Compassion asks you to remain grounded so that you can be truly helpful rather than merely reactive. This is the deepest teaching of the art of not caring. It is not about caring less, but about caring from a place of fullness rather than emptiness, from choice rather than compulsion, from wisdom rather than unconscious reaction. When you learn this art, you discover that you have been carrying burdens that were never yours to carry, worrying about outcomes you could never control, trying to manage emotional states that belong to other people. And in releasing these impossible responsibilities, you create space for what is actually yours to do, to care about, to influence. You find your true work in the world, the contribution that only you can make, the caring that flows naturally from who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. And in this discovery, you find not just peace, but purpose. Not just freedom from unnecessary suffering, but freedom for authentic engagement with life. This is the promise of conscious caring, the gift of learning not to care about everything. You discover what it means to be fully human, without being overwhelmed by humanity, to be deeply caring without being consumed by care, to be genuinely responsive to life without being reactive to everything that crosses your path. And in this discovery, you find something that has been waiting for you all along. You find yourself not the self that tries to be all things to all people, but the self that knows what it loves, what it values, what it chooses to invest its precious attention in. This self moves through the world with a quality of presence that is both powerful and peaceful. It engages deeply with what matters while remaining untroubled by what does not. It cares authentically while maintaining the boundaries necessary for sustainable caring. This is who you become when you master the subtle art of not caring. Not someone who cares less, but someone who cares more consciously. Not someone who is disconnected from life, but someone who is connected to what truly matters. Not someone who has given up on the world, but someone who has learned to engage with it wisely. And this is where the real work begins. Because you see, when you learn to withdraw your energy from what does not truly concern you, when you step back from the endless carousel of collective anxiety, something curious happens. The silence that follows is not empty. It is pregnant with possibility. I have spent countless hours in that silence, watching what emerges when the mind is no longer occupied with managing everyone else's emotional weather. And what I discovered there changed everything I thought I knew about the nature of caring itself. In that quiet space, free from the constant demands of scattered attention, you begin to hear something that has been speaking to you your entire life, but which you could never hear above the noise. It is the voice of your own authentic caring. Not the caring you learned from others, not the caring you perform to maintain your image as a good person, but the caring that arises spontaneously from the depths of your being. This authentic caring has a completely different quality than the compulsive concern we mistake for virtue. It is not anxious. It does not exhaust you. It does not require you to betray yourself in order to help others. Instead, it flows from a wellspring that seems inexhaustible precisely because it is connected to something larger than your personal will. I remember the first time I truly experienced this distinction. I had been working with a patient who came to me week after week, drowning in despair about his relationship with his father. For months, I carried his pain as if it were my own. I would lie awake at night, thinking about his situation, trying to find the perfect intervention that would finally heal this ancient wound. But the more I carried his burden, the less helpful I became. My own anxiety about his progress clouded my perception. My desperate need to fix him prevented me from simply seeing him. I was so busy trying to rescue him from his suffering that I forgot to be present to who he actually was beneath that suffering. One day, something shifted. I cannot tell you exactly how it happened, but I found myself sitting with him in a completely different way. I was no longer carrying his pain. I was no longer trying to solve his problem. I was simply there, present to whatever wanted to emerge in that moment between us. And in that presence, something remarkable occurred. He began to see himself more clearly. Not because I had given him some brilliant insight, but because I had stopped getting in the way of his own natural capacity for self-understanding. My caring had become spacious rather than grasping, allowing rather than controlling. This is what I mean when I speak of authentic caring. It does not try to manage outcomes. It does not insist on particular results. It simply creates space for truth to emerge, for healing to happen, for growth to occur according to its own natural rhythm. But here is what makes this so difficult to practice. Everything in our culture teaches us that caring means controlling, that love means managing, that responsibility means fixing. We have been trained to believe that if we truly care about someone, we should be able to prevent their suffering, solve their problems, ensure their happiness. This is a profound misunderstanding of both caring and human nature itself. Suffering is not a mistake to be corrected, but an essential part of the human journey. Problems are not always meant to be solved, but sometimes to be lived with, learned from, integrated. Happiness cannot be ensured by another person, but must be discovered from within. When you truly understand this, your entire approach to caring transforms. You stop trying to eliminate others' difficulties and start trusting their capacity to grow through those difficulties. You stop trying to spare people from necessary experiences and start supporting them as they navigate those experiences. This requires tremendous courage because it means allowing people you love to struggle, to make mistakes, to face consequences you might be able to help them avoid. It means watching someone you care about walk through fire while you stand witness rather than rushing in to rescue them from flames that might be exactly what they need to transform their lives. I have seen mothers destroy their children through excessive protection, depriving them of the very challenges that would help them develop strength and resilience. I have watched friends enable each other's self-destructive patterns in the name of loyalty and support. I have observed how entire communities can become trapped in cycles of dysfunction because no one has the wisdom to step back and allow natural consequences to do their work. The conscious choice to allow others their own journey, their own lessons, their own growth is perhaps the most loving thing you can do. But it requires you to distinguish between genuine helplessness and chosen helplessness, between someone who truly needs assistance and someone who has simply grown comfortable with being rescued. This discernment cannot be learned from books or theories. It must be developed through careful observation, through learning to sense the difference between authentic need and manipulative demand, between someone who is temporarily overwhelmed and someone who has made victimhood their identity. And here is where the work becomes deeply personal, because as you develop this discernment about others, you inevitably must apply it to yourself. You must ask the uncomfortable question: in what ways am I choosing helplessness? Where am I expecting others to carry burdens that are rightfully mine? When am I seeking rescue rather than taking responsibility for my own growth? This self-examination is perhaps the most crucial aspect of learning not to care about everything, because until you take full responsibility for your own emotional state, your own choices, your own life, you will continue to project that responsibility onto others. You will expect them to manage your feelings, solve your problems, ensure your well-being. And when they inevitably fail to do this impossible job, you will resent them for their failure to care about you in the way you believe you deserve. You will blame them for not reading your mind, not anticipating your needs, not sacrificing themselves sufficiently for your comfort. This is the shadow side of caring that nobody wants to examine. Much of what we call caring for others is actually a demand that they care for us in return. We give not from genuine generosity, but from a desperate hope that our giving will obligate others to give back to us. We rescue not from authentic compassion, but from a need to be needed, to feel important, to maintain our identity as helpful people. When you begin to see these patterns in yourself, it can be deeply uncomfortable. You realize that much of your caring has been conditional, manipulative, designed to serve your own psychological needs rather than the genuine welfare of others. This recognition is painful, but absolutely necessary for authentic caring to emerge. Because authentic caring asks nothing in return. It does not keep score, it does not create obligations. It flows freely from a place of genuine abundance rather than hidden neediness. And this kind of caring can only arise when you have learned to meet your own deepest needs, to take responsibility for your own emotional well-being, to find your own center of gravity. This is why the art of not caring begins with caring for yourself in a completely different way than you have been taught. Not the selfish caring that seeks to avoid all discomfort, but the wise caring that recognizes your own needs, honors your own boundaries, attends to your own growth and healing. When you learn to care for yourself with this kind of conscious attention, something remarkable happens. You stop looking to others to fill the empty places within you. You stop expecting the world to arrange itself according to your preferences. You stop demanding that life be other than what it is. And in this acceptance, this deep letting go of the need for life to be different, you discover a peace that is not dependent on circumstances. You find a happiness that does not require others to behave in particular ways. You uncover a love that does not need to be returned in order to be complete. This is the great paradox of conscious living. When you stop demanding that others meet your needs begin to be met in ways you never expected. When you stop trying to control outcomes begin to align more often with your deepest desires. When you stop grasping for love begins to flow more freely through your life. But this is not a technique or strategy. It is not something you do in order to get something else. It is simply what happens when you align with the natural order of things, when you stop fighting against the current of life and learn to move with it instead. And moving with this current requires a kind of surrender that our willful, controlling culture finds almost impossible to understand. It requires trusting that there is an intelligence operating in life that is greater than your personal understanding, a wisdom that can see patterns and connections that are invisible to your limited perspective. This does not mean becoming passive or fatalistic. It means learning to act from a different place, to make decisions from a deeper knowing rather than surface anxiety. It means developing what I have come to think of as conscious participation in life rather than unconscious reaction to it. When you learn to participate consciously, you discover that you can engage fully with life without being overwhelmed by it. You can care deeply without being consumed by caring. You can love completely without losing yourself in love. This is mastery. Not the mastery of controlling everything around you, but the mastery of choosing consciously how to respond to whatever arises. Not the mastery of eliminating all problems, but the mastery of meeting problems with wisdom rather than reactivity. And this mastery is available to anyone willing to do the inner work required. It does not depend on special circumstances or exceptional abilities. It depends only on your willingness to examine your own patterns, to take responsibility for your own emotional state, to choose consciousness over unconsciousness in each moment. But I must warn you, this path is not for those who want to remain comfortable. Learning not to care about everything will disrupt many of the relationships and patterns that have defined your life. People who have grown accustomed to your scattered attention, your automatic availability, your willingness to carry their emotional burdens, will not easily accept your newfound boundaries. Some will try to guilt you back into the old patterns. Others will become angry when you no longer participate in their drama. Still others will simply drift away, unable to relate to this new version of yourself that refuses to enable their unconscious behaviors. This can be lonely at first. You may find yourself with fewer friends, but deeper friendships. You may discover that many of your relationships were based more on mutual dependency than genuine affection. You may realize that you have been performing a version of yourself that others prefer to who you actually are. But in this loneliness, if you can bear it without rushing to fill it with new distractions, you will make a discovery that changes everything. You will find that you are actually quite good company for yourself. You will discover interests, thoughts, and feelings that have been buried under years of attending to everyone else's needs. You will begin to remember who you were before you learn to abandon yourself in the name of caring for others. You will reconnect with dreams and desires that you have ignored for so long you had forgotten they existed. You will find your own voice again, the one that was drowned out by the constant chorus of other people's expectations and demands. This rediscovery of yourself is not selfish, it is necessary, because until you know who you are, what you value, what brings you genuine joy, you cannot offer anything authentic to others. You can only offer performance, pretense, the carefully constructed image of who you think you should be. But when you know yourself, when you have done the work of reclaiming your own authentic nature, you have something real to give. Your presence becomes a gift because it is genuinely present rather than scattered across 1,000 concerns. Your caring becomes powerful because it comes from fullness rather than emptiness. And others sense this difference even if they cannot articulate it. They feel safer around you because you are not trying to fix them or change them or absorb their emotional states. They feel more free to be themselves because you are not demanding that they be anything other than what they are. This is the ultimate gift of learning not to care about everything. You become someone who can be trusted with others' authentic selves because you are no longer threatened by authenticity, no longer trying to manage or control it. You can witness pain without being destroyed by it, celebrate joy without being envious of it, observe growth without needing to direct it. In this witness consciousness, this ability to be present without being reactive, you discover something profound about the nature of love itself. Love is not an emotion, though emotions may accompany it. Love is not an action, though actions may express it. Love is a way of being, a quality of presence, a capacity to see and accept what is without needing it to be different. When you love this way, you give others the space to be fully human without judgment or demand. You allow them their struggles, their imperfections, their unique path of growth and learning. You do not try to spare them from life, but this is what learned in them as they engage with life. I have fully support my decades of exploring the human psyche, of sitting with people in their deepest pain and highest joy. The greatest gift you can give another human being is your own wholeness, your own authentic presence, your own capacity to remain centered while they navigate the storms of their existence. And this gift can only be given by someone who has learned the art we have been discussing. Someone who knows what is theirs to carry and what belongs to others. Someone who can care deeply without being consumed by caring. Someone who has mastered the subtle, profound art of not caring about everything so that they can care authentically about what truly matters. This is the invitation life extends to each of us. Not to become cold or indifferent, but to become conscious. Not to stop caring, but to care wisely. Not to withdraw from life, but to engage with it from a place of genuine choice rather than unconscious compulsion. The choice is always yours, in each moment, with each person, in each situation. Will you scatter your precious attention across every demand that presents itself, or will you choose consciously where to invest your care? Will you react automatically to every stimulus, or will you respond from your deeper wisdom? These are not easy questions, and the path they point toward is not an easy path. But it is the path to freedom, to authentic relationship, to genuine peace. It is the path to becoming fully yourself while remaining genuinely available to others. And, perhaps most importantly, it is the path to discovering what you came here to do, the unique contribution only you can make to the great human story that unfolds around us each day. But what you discover in this conscious choosing, this deliberate withdrawal from the noise of collective anxiety, is something that will perhaps disturb you at first. You find that you have been living your entire life as if you were in a crowded theater, constantly aware of the audience, constantly performing for their approval, constantly adjusting your authentic responses to match what you believe they expect to. And see it when you finally step out of that theater, when you remove yourself from the endless performance of caring about everything that crosses the stage of public attention, you encounter something that our culture has taught you to fear above all else. You encounter yourself. Not the self you have constructed for others to admire, but the raw, unedited awareness that has been watching this whole elaborate show from behind your eyes. This encounter can be terrifying because you realize how little you actually know about who you are beneath all the roles you have been playing. You have been so busy being the good parent, the concerned citizen, the helpful friend, the responsible employee, that you have forgotten there is someone underneath all these costumes, someone who has preferences that may not align with what is expected, someone who dreams dreams that society might not approve of, someone who sees things that others prefer to ignore. I remember the first time I truly allowed myself to stop caring about what my colleagues thought of my ideas, my methods, my unconventional approach to understanding the human mind. For years, I had modulated my insights, softened my observations, made my discoveries more palatable to the scientific community that surrounded me. I told myself I was being professional, diplomatic, wise, but what I was actually doing was betraying my own deepest knowing in service of belonging to a group that could never fully understand what I was seeing. I was sacrificing the truth of my experience on the altar of acceptance, and the cost was enormous, though I did not recognize it at the time. The cost was a kind of inner deadness, a gradual disconnection from the source of my own vitality. Because when you constantly override your authentic responses, when you perpetually translate your genuine insights into language others find comfortable, when you endlessly shape yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant for you, something essential begins to die within you. You lose access to what I have come to understand as the deepest intelligence within human consciousness. The intelligence that knows without being taught, that sees without being shown, that understands connections that the rational mind cannot explain. This intelligence speaks through intuition, through dreams, through the sudden insights that arise when you are not trying to figure anything out. But this intelligence requires something that our modern world seems designed to eliminate. It requires stillness. It requires space. It requires the courage to not know, to not have an opinion, to not immediately categorize and judge every experience that arises in your awareness. When you are constantly reacting to the latest crisis, the newest outrage, the most recent demand for your emotional participation, you create a kind of static in your consciousness that drowns out this deeper knowing. You become like a radio that is tuned between stations, picking up fragments of many different signals, but unable to clearly receive any one transmission. This is why learning not to care about everything is actually a practice of tuning your inner radio to a different frequency. Instead of being constantly available to the emergency broadcast system of collective anxiety, you learn to tune in to the quieter, more subtle signals that arise from your own depths. And what you discover there may surprise you. You discover that you have opinions about things you never allowed yourself to have opinions about. You find that you care deeply about matters you had dismissed as unimportant. You realize that you have been ignoring aspects of life that your authentic self finds absolutely fascinating, while forcing yourself to be interested in things that actually bore you to tears. This process of rediscovering your authentic caring is like archaeological work. You must carefully brush away layers of accumulated dust, the sediment of years of living according to other people's priorities, to uncover what has been buried beneath. And what you find is not always what you expected. You may discover that you care more about beauty than you allowed yourself to admit. You may find that you are deeply moved by things that seem trivial to others, while remaining strangely unmoved by things that society insists are vitally important. You may realize that your authentic caring flows in directions that surprise even you. I knew a man who spent 30 years in a career that everyone assured him was noble and important, helping people through social services. But when he finally gave himself permission to stop caring about what others expected of him, he discovered that his deepest passion was for growing things. He left his prestigious position to become a gardener, and for the first time in decades, he felt truly alive. This was not selfishness, this was alignment. This was the difference between living from your authentic center and living from the collection of shoulds and expectations that you have mistaken for your own desires. When you align with your genuine nature, you have more energy, more joy, more real presence to offer the world. But our culture teaches us to be suspicious of this kind of authenticity. We are told that following our own path is selfish, that caring about what genuinely moves us is indulgent, that we should override our natural inclinations in service of higher ideals. But what if this teaching is backwards? What if the highest service you can offer is to become fully yourself? Consider carefully this. Does the world not need another copy of someone else? It does not need you to perfectly reproduce the caring patterns that worked for your parents, your teachers, your heroes. What the world needs is what you uniquely have to offer. When you are operating from your authentic center, when your caring flows from your genuine nature rather than from learned obligations. When you care authentically, your care has a quality that cannot be manufactured or performed. It carries something recognized that people at a level deeper, they than thought, sense that you are not trying to bed, not working to maintain an image, not performing compassion for an audience. You are simply being who you are, and your caring flows naturally from that being. This authentic presence has a strange power. It gives others permission to be authentic as well. When you stop performing goodness and start embodying your genuine nature, you create space for others to drop their own performances. Your refusal to participate in the theater of artificial caring invites everyone around you to discover what their own authentic caring might look like. But here is something I want you to understand about this process. It is not comfortable. Authenticity is not comfortable. When you stop doing things because you should and start doing them because they arise from your genuine nature, you will often find yourself in situations that feel unfamiliar, uncertain, even frightening. You may find yourself saying no to things that everyone expects you to say yes to. You may discover that you want to spend your time in ways that others consider strange or wasteful. You may realize that your authentic self has interests, desires, and ways of being that do not fit neatly into the categories society has provided for you. This can create what I have come to think of as authentic loneliness. It is different from the loneliness of being rejected or ignored. It is the loneliness of being the only one in your immediate environment who has chosen to stop pretending, who has decided to risk being real rather than being accepted. But in this loneliness, something remarkable begins to happen. You start to attract different kinds of people, not the people who were drawn to your performance, but people who recognize something genuine in your presence. Not those who want you to take care of their emotional needs, but those who are also committed to taking responsibility for their own inner lives. These connections, when they occur, have a quality that you may never have experienced before. They are based not on mutual neediness or shared performance, but on mutual recognition. You see each other clearly, accept what you see, and choose to spend time together anyway. This is what relationship looks like when it is not based on unconscious caring, but on conscious choice. In such relationships, you discover that you can disagree without disconnecting, that you can have different opinions without becoming enemies, that you can care about someone while allowing them to live their life according to their own wisdom rather than your preferences. This is perhaps the most mature form of love available to human beings, love that does not seek to possess, control, or change its object, love that can witness without interfering, support without enabling, care without becoming entangled. But developing this capacity requires you to face something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You must confront the reality that you cannot save anyone. You cannot spare the people you love from the difficulties that are necessary for their growth. You cannot prevent them from making mistakes that might teach them essential lessons. This is perhaps the hardest truth for a caring person to accept, that your love, no matter how deep, cannot protect others from the experiences they need to have. That your worry, no matter how intense, cannot control outcomes that are beyond your influence. That your constant availability, no matter how generous, cannot substitute for someone else's willingness to take responsibility for their own life. When you truly understand this, something shifts in the very foundation of how you relate to others. You stop trying to manage their emotional weather and start trusting their capacity to navigate their own storms. You cease attempting to shield them from difficulty and begin supporting them as they develop their own strength. This shift from rescuing to supporting, from managing to trusting, from controlling to allowing, is what transforms caring from a burden into a gift. When you care this way, you give others something infinitely more valuable than your worry or your solutions. You give them your faith in their ability to handle whatever life brings them. And this faith, this trust in another person's fundamental capacity to grow and learn and adapt, has a power that rescuing lacks. When someone feels genuinely trusted rather than constantly managed, they often rise to meet that trust. They discover capabilities they never knew they had because they have been given space to discover them. So here we are, you and I, at the end of this exploration together. And perhaps you are wondering what to do with what you have heard, how to begin this practice of conscious caring in a world that demands your constant reaction. The answer, my friend, is simpler than you might imagine. You begin by noticing, just noticing when you feel that familiar pull to absorb someone else's anxiety, to carry a burden that is not yours, to have an opinion about something that has nothing to do with your actual life. And in that moment of noticing, you pause, you breathe, and you ask yourself the question that changes everything. Is this mine to carry? In that pause, in that simple question, lies the beginning of your freedom. The subtle art of not caring is not learned overnight, but practiced moment by moment, choice by choice, until one day you realize you are no longer living everyone else's life, but finally, beautifully, your own.